Welcome to Life in Red.
Right, pleased to be joined here today by the men and creators of Tether. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you so much for having us, Ryan.
So Matt, we'll start with you. And before we get into the app, we'll just kind of define some roles here. What is your role with Tether?
Okay, I'm the founder and the CEO. And so I guess it was November of 2019 was when I started Tether. And we'll get into how Addison and I sort of came together and how he became one of our co-founders here at Tether. But yeah, it was after a long battle with mental health, and I'm happy to go into the story more.
Mhm.
And a successful but unfulfilling career in finance that sort of led me to building Tether, and I'm happy to jump into that.
Right, that's super interesting. So we'll definitely touch on that. Addison, we'll just define your role. What do you do for Tether?
Yeah, as Matt said, I'm a co-founder, and then I'm the head of brand and impact for Tether.
Perfect. So if we're going to talk to anybody about this company, you two are the men, and that's perfect. So what is Tether? You mentioned it's about mental health. That's where our mutual connection and how we connected about this episode. Matt, why don't you tell us about this app and how it kind of came to be? I know it's probably a long general story, so take as much time as you need, but
I'll try. I'm working on actually condensing this more and more these days because I've been coached to do so. But it's been suggested that I shorten the story a little bit. But yeah, I've dealt with mental health issues my entire life. I grew up here in Toronto. One of the things that I think really defined, how I viewed myself, I would say, is a couple things. First was a lot of childhood bullying, and the second was, coming from a home where there was, all the support that you could want in the world. Never missed a meal. My parents worked like dogs to provide for us. My mother was a lawyer. My father was an accountant, so I come from a professional home. And they did everything to support me and my sister and make sure that we could do anything that we wanted. But there was always sort of this gap. It's like I didn't feel like my parents totally understood what I was going through, and they didn't totally understand how I felt. And it's been actually interesting to have those conversations now with them as an adult and going back to that. But those were kind of the two things that defined my childhood for me. And it made me feel like I was apart from other people. It made me feel like I was something that needed to be fixed. And it made me feel like I was a problem. And, those are all things that I've kind of learned in hindsight. But as I grew up, there was always this hole that I felt inside of me, something that I was trying to fill, like a longing to feel whole again. Right. And I never really knew what that was. And so when you're young, you start to try and figure out ways to sort of fill that unconscious hole that you feel inside of you. So when I was younger, when I was like in early teens, it was food. When I got into high school, it was partying, drinking, drugs, all of that kind of stuff. And then when I went to university, it became achievement. And it served me, right? In some ways, all of those things have sort of served me along my path, especially when I started to turn my brain towards achievement. I ended up graduating top of my class from U of T. I did the CFA, which is the Chartered Financial Analyst designation, while I was still in undergrad. Graduated, joined a hedge fund here in Toronto, and became a portfolio manager by the time I was 27. So all of that hard work paid off. I was a very young portfolio manager. I was working directly with the three principals of the company that I worked for, raising money. So there was a lot of valuable experience that I garnered from that, but I was still miserable in a lot of ways. And I would still go home at the end of the day of work, and I would still numb out because there was just something that still wasn't fulfilling. I did very well, made good money, owned my own home. All things on the outside look good for me. But I still have that sort of gaping hole. And then what really turned things around for me, not turn things around, but was the turning point, was in 2018 when my best friends very suddenly passed away. from a pulmonary embolism. And it was sort of doubly shocking because we actually lived just across the way, like this almost alleyway, but it was a townhouse complex. So our front steps faced each other and our balconies faced each other. And he actually passed away on the front steps right in front of our home. And just something after that really shifted and changed for me. I became very depressed. It was hard for me to get out of bed. I couldn't work. There was all of these things that were starting to happen. I had to go on mental health leave. And I started to try absolutely everything that I could in order to, get through that. I tried therapy, medication. I tried experimental treatments. I really ran the entire gamut in terms of things that I could do to heal and get better. It wasn't until I found all of this is in hindsight, but it wasn't until I found a men's peer support group here in Toronto that things started to shift for me. And I went to that group on the recommendation of a friend of mine. He actually went with me because he was thinking of joining it as well. We went together, and it was really the first time that I had ever been in a supportive space of men where we were talking about what we were struggling with. And I didn't feel like I was any less than because of what I was going through. In fact, I felt understood by these men. And that was a powerful experience. And, that didn't fix the problem. But if I look back on it, it definitely shifted something inside of me and started me down a different type of path in terms of my own healing. I ended up then that was about, I would say that was about November of 2018 was the first time that I did that. And then in April 2019, I ended up going on a retreat down in the US. And again, it was a men's retreat. And I had decided I wanted to go deeper into the work. And I had a really profound experience at that retreat. And again, something shifted inside of me. And this time, I kind of ended up going off the deep end a little bit. And when I got home, so like I came home from that retreat on a Monday, and I sat down at my desk and I was like, I can't do this anymore. This is not what I'm meant to do. I didn't know what I was meant to do, but I knew this wasn't it. And I decided that, I was going to quit my job. So I got home on a Monday, ended up quitting my job on a Wednesday, and then went off. And, Tether really kind of came out of, I was very fortunate that I was able to take the time, saved up money, was able to go away for a little bit, travel for 6 weeks. And then through a variety of different circumstances, ended up having coffee with a friend one day. And for whatever reason, this idea clicked in my mind based on a conversation that we were having. And I've had ideas before for things that I wanted to do. I never pursued it. And I was terrified to pursue this. And I didn't know how I was going to finance it. I didn't know how I was going to build it. I had no, experience in tech of any kind. But for whatever reason, I just kind of kept pursuing it. And here we are today. So it's really been, it's been an interesting journey. And, along the way, I mean, we'll talk about how we met each other, but, Addison and I reconnected. We went to high school together long ago, and ended up reconnecting through this process of me going through my own healing journey, and him going through his own healing journey. And, it worked. And, now we're here talking with you about, an app that's in the App Store, has 3,500 men who have downloaded it. And we're just really at the beginning of our journey.
Yeah. And it's been fun to follow. I kind of found and stumbled on through some mutual connections here. I was late last year, and you'd never have known that this is like really like a brand new start for you, like that it was only kind of like a year old at the time that I found it. But I see, you being mentioned on like TMZ and doing all these high profile interviews. I think that just goes to speak of, the need for something like this, because I'm in the mental health community and we talk a lot about peer support. And people try with Facebook groups and but it always kind of fizzles out. It's something that's hard to stick to. So to have two people super committed to it and really pushing out this idea, I think is great. And I had a lot of similarities to your story, where we grew up in these privileged homes, all these, you could have anything you ever wanted, and yet you still feel empty, or you still feel depressed, or you still feel like something lonely, missing, and when people ask you, but you have everything, and it's like, I know, and I don't know why I feel like shit. You know what I mean? Like it's when you spoke about that, I think that's super important to acknowledge. Addison, I'll get with you. Where Matt mentioned you guys connected. How did you come a part of this story, and what drew you to this idea?
Yeah, absolutely. So I, like Matt, had no intention of ever really doing anything in mental health when I started my career. I had moved out to Los Angeles after dancing on scholarship in Pittsburgh and was in entertainment and doing all that stuff. However, in the last 10 years, I lost my brother to cancer. I found my father after his suicide. And I was in a really bad accident about 3 years ago that left me relearning to walk and just sort of operate in the world. And whether I liked it or not, those three experiences obviously made mental health a full-time job within my own life, whether I wanted to or not, and obviously unpaid. That's kind of like where, whether I liked it or not, mental health just kind of became this force within my life that I really had to actually find flow within if I was going to make it through all those experiences. And Matt, like you said, we went to high school together. And just after the accident, I was grieving quite heavily, and I was also dealing with a lot of chronic pain. And to be quite honest, I was, for the first time in my life, kind of had entered into sort of a suicidal depression. And Matt was grieving as well at the time and going through what he was going through. And I just noticed that he had put a Facebook status, because we were sort of that first wave of Facebook out of high school. So luckily we were connected in that way. And I just kind of remember thinking like, oh, he gets it. He's really going through it right now when he was grieving. And so decided to reach out and see if he just like wanted to talk. And he did. And so we sort of started this peer relationship because we were in this very similar position. And I always make a point of saying this, but when I did get to talk to Matt that first time, I call it the Matt moment, but he admitted to me that he didn't want to live, but he didn't want to die. And I very much understood that feeling. And at the same time, nobody and no man for sure had ever admitted that they found themselves in that position before. So it was very powerful for me. And so we decided to stay connected, and we were both kind of, as Matt said, going to the ends of the world at that point, trying different mental health modalities and treatments and therapy. And, and we've kind of formed this peer relationship where, there was no hierarchy. There was just, two men kind of being very honest about their mental health journey. And in retrospect, obviously we didn't plan for it to sort of be the beta of Tether, but it really is and was and still gets to be to this day. And I think that's a big part of it, is when Matt wasn't building something to make money or building something to feel successful, he was building something he wanted to use. And when he brought the idea forward, it was something that I knew that I very much would want to use. Considering our experience when it comes to mental health and well-being, as far as what we've tried and what we've gone to, I figured it would be something that many other men would want to use too. So I kind of came in at that point, and to be honest, I'm kind of that friend that a lot of people bring ideas to. So I was actually in the point of creating boundaries when Matt had come up with this and was kind of like, okay, yep. A lot of friends with app ideas, and, Matt came back with our other co-founders, Burke White and Denny Park, who, the tech side of things, and he was ready to go. And, when someone sells their home to make sure a free app exists for men, it's a pretty big signal that this is something that's going to happen. It's something that, I cultivate my life around championing like that kind of behavior exactly. And so the idea that it actually could carve out a professional position for me, and I could get to be a part of building the community and the brand, and sort of position it, like you mentioned earlier, make sure that people see it and are talking about it. It was just something that I thought would start with a couple hours helping Matt out, and it turned into what I do. So that's kind of where we're at.
So Matt, you went all in. You sold your home, and you're like, "Let's go." You're just going to dive right into that. That is,
Yeah.
That does say something. You're absolutely right. So let's talk about what this app is, because, as I hear you talk and explaining things, it doesn't seem like, you have to be suffering from mental illness. Maybe it's just a moment in time, or like you said, you both were suffering from grief, or Addison, you had your accident. So like kind of like go through like what this app is and who you're trying to bring in and who is it really supposed to help?
I think your observation that you don't need to be struggling with mental health issues to use Tether is like totally right on. I think what this is really about is about building, real connected relationships between guys, like being able to build a relationship between two guys where it's like you can talk about, you can talk about hockey, you can talk about whatever, you know what I mean? Like you can have that kind of high level conversation, but then because of the reason why both of you are there and connecting, and because you're both on the platform, there is this understanding that if you need to go there, you can, right? And I think that just knowing that you can go there and you can have the conversation and you do have the freedom to say, I'm not okay, is a very powerful thing that deepens our relationship substantially. And I think it's what a lot of men are looking for. One of my buddies who I was talking to, he made a great point. He said, he's like, life is kind of like a hockey interview. But when I'm on Tether, it's not like that, right? And I think that even in the simplicity of that statement, he hit on something really important, right? It's like we're always, when somebody asks you how you're doing, we always say, oh yeah, no, I'm good. This is going okay. This is going okay. Blah, blah, blah. Kids, wife, partner, job, all of those types of things. And you start checking off the boxes for people and telling them how you're okay. But do we ever really slow down and say, you know what, like, I'm not doing great? And I think for a lot of men, we've been conditioned in so many ways to have that wall in front of us. We've been told that it's not okay to struggle. It's not masculine to do so. And I think as a result, a lot of men are living with like profound amounts of shame and isolation and a lack of purpose and meaning in their lives. And so what we've done is we've built a community where the understanding is that you don't have to talk about what's going on with you if you don't want to, but you can go there. And there are men who are like-minded and want to go there with you if you need it. So it's really about what we've done is we've really created a very effective container for these relationships to take place and to take hold. And then what Addison's done so well, and I'll let him talk about that, is develop programming around getting men into a team-based environment. We know from both research and just like anecdotal evidence that men really do thrive in team-based environments. And there's a saying that women heal face-to-face and men heal shoulder-to-shoulder. And it's very true, right? It's that, through activity, through, communal learning, through group interaction, for whatever reason, that provides us with just enough comfort to be able to start the process of opening up. So yeah, there's that. And then there's so much more that we're building, I think, from an awareness standpoint. I'll let Addison talk about awareness and advocacy and all of the things that I think we try and build into our brand.
Yeah, that's one thing I love about an app like this is even if you might not be comfortable with speaking about it, the one thing I always say is, as someone who speaks about it publicly, everyone kind of, well, not everyone, people have an idea that if I'm going to talk about my mental illness or my feelings, like you have to do it on social media, or you have to do interviews, or you have to, like put it out to everybody. But something like this is, if you're going through something and maybe you're not ready to talk about it quite yet, but you can go on and see people talking about things. And then even though you're not necessarily talking about your feelings, you're like, oh, like I can see Matt, he's typing about this thing, experiencing grief. That's exactly how I feel. And then it creates that kind of bond. And even if it's a one-way bond at that point, I find that very interesting. Addison, when we talk about this app, like in my mind, I'm like thinking like, is it like Tinder, but for like mental health men, right? Like you like swipe and make connections based on profiles. Like how does it all work? And then let's talk about some of the programming, because I've noticed a couple really cool things you've been doing on social media.
Yeah, I think it's exactly like what you said, in the sense of once you come on and decide that you want to be a part of the community, you do build a profile. It doesn't match. It's not quite mental health dating, but in a sense, it's exactly how you put it is, there's an entry point for everybody in terms of what they're comfortable with and what they feel safe with, as far as sharing or supporting. And one thing we always like to hit when Matt and I do talks around peer support and what peer support is and isn't, is that it's a balanced and boundary driven relationship. And when you're thinking about peer support, at any point, either man can be the one being supported or the one doing the supporting, and that can switch at any moment. So it's not about, going on there to be fixed or going on there because there's something wrong with you, but just going on there to be part of a community that's willing to honor everything that goes on with somebody. And so that's kind of really the differentiating point. And it's exactly like you said, some men come on, they check in with an emotion and they post a thread and they share right away. Some men come on and they start by supporting other men to see how it goes. And we have men that, come on and just witness what goes on in that safe space for a few weeks and then enter in their own way. And of course, then there's everything that can happen in the back end. So if you were to see someone who's grieving and it resonates with you, you would have that option to direct message them. Or if a few men in the main threads are speaking about something like that, the idea to put them together in a group message. And we really saw that interest in sort of building these organic pods at the time, based on what people are going through. And like Matt said, and like you've touched on, mental health or mental illness is not at all the entry point necessarily. So when we looked at building the pods and the programming right now, we've launched our accountability programming, where guys are put into pods, and then experientially as a group, they get to learn about the science of accountability and how to create a culture of accountability. And that's led by Chris Wilson, who's a master men's coach. And in designing the program with him, we really made it so that the men are put together and they're aware that everyone sort of joined Tether, like we said, taking that oath and being willing to show up when you need to, but really it's based on accountability and they're building and learning around that. So it's very interesting. And one of the really cool things about my job, as far as the programming and the community goes, is just looking at what are barriers for men, what gets in the way of them talking or sharing or supporting, and what's the simplest way to move that a little bit forward. So a great example is every day, every morning, you can come on and do a one-word check-in, which just involves picking one word for how you're feeling physically, mentally, and emotionally. And that's it. You don't have to explain the one word. You don't have to go in. You can, if you want, you can do another thread, but it's just, looking at different ways and different ways to really activate men in just normalizing this type of behavior, because it is normal and it gets to be normal. And that conversation obviously is changing, and it's proven by, the numbers of men that are joining us at this time.
Right now, I think it seems like kind of fate, because as we moved into the pandemic and we all talk about the emotional and mental kind of tax that this pandemic has created, and that really hasn't been addressed by governments or business in a lot of ways, that like you almost couldn't have picked a better time to kind of have this already start going and then kind of build that growth. One thing I'm curious about, because as you're marketing, as you're doing outreach, as you're trying to get this into, as many phones of men as possible, how do you, and I'll let whoever wants to take this, if you both want to jump in, that's cool. But how do you try to explain to men who might not be comfortable with this idea still of sharing or emotions, or, we talk about the toxic masculinity traits that unfortunately still a lot of men have, and especially men who grew up in small towns or maybe conservative households. How do you go about trying to break down that barrier and reach out to them and like let them know, like, you can come in here, this is a safe place, we can talk about it? Like, do you have a strategy or focus on that? Because that's something I'm very kind of passionate about and really want to explore.
Yeah, and I can let Matt elaborate on this more, but one thing that both, like Matt said, research and anecdotally that we see and we know just through lived experience, is that men really respond to modeled behavior when they see other men, especially men that they trust, doing things. So, we do practice what we preach, in the sense that you'll see Matt and I out there having conversations about, what we've been through and what we're going through. And so whether it's seeing us on an Instagram TV or hearing us on a podcast or hearing one of the men, or just out of curiosity downloading and, like we said, witnessing the behavior and learning experientially. There's just Tether as a brand really it aims to show up as sort of the willing best friend. Like I say, like think more like Ron Weasley or like Sam Wise, like I'll go with you, we'll figure it out together. I don't know all the answers, but I do know, you know, mystics and wisdom leaders along the way, and we'll figure it out. Tether's not supposed to be this sort of old man on a rock telling you, you know, what mental health is and how to live your life. It's, you know, come on and let's figure it out together. And we very, very intentionally stayed peer supporters, even as ourselves. We're not trying to get certified. We're not trying to become a psychologist while building Tether, where we want to champion the role of a peer supporter and take it as far as a man can take it, which we've already seen can be quite far and very impactful. And sometimes, and Matt is great to talk about this, but sometimes it can be a greater vantage point to have an uptick of service for mental health for men. It's just the way that they respond to mental health in general, rather than therapy as a modality, but the idea of peer support and it being enabled by other men for them.
Yeah, I agree with everything, and I think Addison, you know, hit the most important point around modeling behavior, and that, you know, that is very much rooted in, you know, I think you know, sometimes it's hard to be the first guy through the door. But there has to be a first guy through the door in all of these situations. And so I'm not so concerned with, like, you know, the specific marketing that's going to convince a guy who's not there yet to get there, right? You know, for me, it's more just like, you know, show them with what you do, right? Show them with the other men that you attract. You know, show them by showing up and by being there and trying not to change their attitudes towards it, right? If they're not ready to go there, they're not ready to go there, and there's nothing that I can do about that. But what I do know is that peer support is extraordinarily effective at bringing men into the conversation, and at the very least, it's very good at breaking down the barriers of isolation that we often feel around it. So even if that person isn't ready to jump through the threshold, isn't ready to take that step, they still get the benefit of seeing that there are men talking about it. And I think over time, that starts to break down barriers, right? So, I mean, that part is a gradual process. I would say, you know, I think by approaching it as being this, you know, approachable best friend, right? That's really, I think, where our strength lies. Again, you know, we're not experts, right? We're lived experience experts, but we're not mental health experts, and we're not practitioners, nor do we want to be any of those things. I think one of the things that Addison and I have sort of said in a number of different places is, like, we're there for you before, during, and after you get the professional support you need, right? We're your team. We are the team that you build, and that can get you through anything. And we're not there to say, oh, it's time to go to therapy. We're there when you say, I think I want to go to therapy. We'll be like, yeah, man. And when you're done therapy, you can, like, give me a buzz. Let's talk about it. I'd love to hear how it goes, right? So it's actually a very different approach. And I think what really underpins this is letting men know that they're safe to talk about it if they want. And that's really at the core of everything that we build, rather than necessarily saying, oh, you know, men need to do this, 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 and this, and then that's going to help their mental health. I think really, and this kind of goes back to the community aspect of it and the modeling behavior of it. It's simply so effective to, I'll tell you a story, and it's like simply so effective just to know that something is there. And we had recently something happen where I think it was like probably in the first couple of weeks that we had run the platform. There was a young man that came onto the platform, and he had just attempted suicide. He didn't know how to tell his parents, and he told the community that he didn't know what to say. This had happened. He was miserable. He didn't know what to do. And, you know, a whole bunch of men jumped in. You know, I think his post was responded to like 40 something times. It was like a really huge outpouring for this young man who had obviously just gone through something very traumatic. And we kind of he checked in a little bit. He said, "Thank you guys. I've never felt so supported like this in my entire life," what have you. Couple posts, and then don't hear from him. I tried to message him just to catch up and say, "Hey man, how are you doing?" No word. And this was about 8 months ago. And then maybe a week and a half ago, I see his name pop up on a thread again. And he's like, "Hey, I just wanted to check in and give you all an update." And he goes through his update. And what was so gratifying about that is like the community served its purpose, right? He got what he needed in that moment. Maybe he didn't post every single day for 8 months or something like that, but when he was ready, right? He remembered the impact that the community had on him, and it meant enough to him that he decided that he wanted to come back and actually update us. He didn't have to. He doesn't know any of us personally, but he felt called to come back to the community and share and say, "Thank you so much. I'm doing better. This is what's going on in my life." And that, I think, was really the strength of it, right? It's that, we were there for him during a very intense emotional experience for him. He got what he needed from the group. He went away, he did his own thing, and then, came back and said, "Hey man, I just wanted to update you on what's been going on for me." We all said great. And I think that was really evidence of the community. It can be just like that, right? And then we also have men who are posting every day, actively engaged, responding to a lot of comments, and it's actually part of their daily routine. So I think there is no right way to do it. And I think that's what we try and really impart upon people. It's like, we can just be there for you if you need us in a pinch, or we can be a consistent part of your lives every single day. It's really up to you. But I think the safety of the container that Addison, myself, our co-founder Burke have created collectively is really what is I think what is going to ultimately allow us to help. My hope is that we get to help millions of men on the planet, and it's really just about making this approachable. It's about lowering the bar to entry. Therapy, coaching, all of these things can be really daunting to start, but if you can just see that you're not alone and that there are other men out there who want to get better, who want to find more purpose and meaning in their lives, I think that is really what attracts people, and what I think is our real strength.
I absolutely love that, because when I'm giving like a public talk or doing an interview myself, one thing I always like to preface is, I'm not an expert in anything. Like, I can tell you what I've tried and what I've done, but I don't know if that's going to work for you. Like, one thing for me right now is a big thing that's really worked is CBD oil. And that's really helped with my anxiety. And people ask me about it, and I'm like, I don't know if it'll help you. Like, some people have said it doesn't help at all. And, but I love this whole theme of, no one's claiming to be an expert. No one's claiming to, like you said, have that, like, you need to do this, and then your mental health will be better, right? Like, you're all just along for this journey together, and then that sense of community and team, it's just so huge. I do want to touch on a little bit. It's like, how do you moderate this? Especially with men, you get trolls, you get, maybe assholes who say the wrong thing or whatever. Like, is that a concern? Has that been a concern? And maybe how do you go about kind of like trying to moderate this community a little bit, or at least kind of curate it in a way where people do feel safe and there is a safe environment for people to come forward?
Yeah, I can hop in on that. So I think a lot of that comes into, like we said, building the safe space. And part of building a safe space is always going to be like really building and maintaining a culture. But it really segues into what we were just talking about, where, moderation, especially when it comes to safety and mental health, for so many people, even in discussions I've had in the last 10 years, and especially in the last year, where it's, but you're not a professional. And moving away from a culture where not being a professional is a paralysis point and it's a pride point. It's the first thing you mention. I'm not a professional, so what does support look like for you? And in a way, being able to moderate in that sense when it comes to safety, I'll get into the other part of it later, but to be able to do that, it's just so important. And it's something that we really try to always show, even in our own behavior. And Matt and I are obviously very active on the app. Like, I would assume almost everybody who's on there knows who we are. And it's not something we built and kind of made for the other guys. We are the guys and we show up. And I think that's been a huge part from day one, because when we started, it was, you know, the two of us and then the next guy who downloaded and the next guy. And there's something in that, like we said, where when the behavior is modeled, there's a safety, but also like sort of this protection point. And we really haven't had that many issues within the app because it's grown organically in that way, which has been very cool. As far as, you know, trolls and whatnot, I don't know, you know, I instead of assholes, I might call them people with extreme opportunities for growth. And that's how we look at it. You know, we don't even use language like reporting or reprimanding or anything like that. You know, it really is, if something gets brought to our attention by another man, okay, looks like we have an opportunity for growth. Obviously, if it's, you know, illegal or something in the zero tolerance category, that's a different way of dealing with it. But even then, still, you know, walking someone to the door, letting them know they always have, you know, this can be an opportunity for growth. It's not a canceling, it's not a shutdown. It's, you know, because everybody comes to the Tether door, whichever door they enter through, like we talked about, because there's so many opportunities there. You know, everyone comes at a different place. And that's one thing that we definitely try to respect. There's no ideal Tether men. There's just any man who shows up at Tether. And that's really worked for us. And maybe 9 months ago, you might have said like, you know, that doesn't make any sense. But now we have 9 months of data and proof that actually a culture is cultivated and it really does almost in a sense protect itself. And of course, we have trusted voices within the community that get elevated to a point, and the peers in that community. We have a moderating and we have a lot of advisors, and yeah, it's really cool to see it develop and to tweak and to be extremely responsible and active on a daily basis, depending on what happens. But right now, the men that exist on Tether seem to be very passionate about protecting the culture that they entered into, which is really cool.
Yeah, the community.
And it makes our job a lot easier.
Yeah,
that too. Yeah.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I did want to get into, because you both kind of mentioned these journeys you both went on to before kind of starting the app. And I would love for each of you to kind of share with whatever you're comfortable. But there's been so many different things, you know, I've talked to people about on this podcast about psychedelic therapy, about, you know, all sorts of different kinds of therapies, like obviously exercise. Matt, I'll start with you.
Mm-hmm.
What kinds of things, like you said, you ran the gambit, you tried a whole bunch of things. What were some of the things that you tried, and maybe what worked really well for you, and maybe, you know, you wouldn't try again?
Oh man, do you have another hour? Oh wow. Okay. So yeah. So I mean, I've done therapy, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's a good one. I believe that, you know, getting to the root of some of the issues that, you know, that you have through therapy is, you know, very effective. Understanding where things come from, what their origins are, very effective. But I don't think that therapy for me has been enough. Like there's a point at which you kind of get to the root of things, and then you're like, okay, now what do I do with it? And so then coaching has been very effective, and mindset training is kind of the next step of that. And really understanding what are those automatic negative thoughts that you're having, or those automatic patterns, or those belief systems that you've constructed based on how you were born and where you were raised, and the things that happened to you, and like what's your relationship with all of these things in your life, whether it's like money, sex, profession, all of these things, right? It's like, it's important to really get a holistic view of that, and then also realize when you're just stuck in a thought loop. I mean, on the therapeutic side, I've done body work, I've done energy work, I've done heroic doses of mushrooms, I've done ayahuasca, I've done all of these. I've done, you know, holotropic breath work, other breath work. So, you know, I've done quite a bit of stuff, and like all of these things contribute. I mean, you know, there is definitely a huge benefit to psychedelics and to entheogenic medicines and plant medicines, responsibly done, properly guided, you know, properly evaluated in advance. And I really, you know, highly recommend that if you are going down that path, you do your research, right? You know what I mean? Like it is something where you need to be safe. You need to feel safe doing it. You need to be with an appropriate practitioner. You need to prepare in advance. There's a lot of things that go into that diet, all of these kinds of things. And I always made sure that I prepared really well, and that the people that I did it with were through people that I trusted or that I recommended or knew somebody that I knew. So I was very careful about how I vetted that. But there is something to being in that space, and it is a profound space of complete acceptance, absolute self-love, and a deep understanding and knowing that you are whole. And that you are perfect in exactly the way that you are. Now, I wouldn't say, and I'm going to caveat this, right? I think a lot of what we see with, with a lot of these treatments, and it's not just psychedelics, it's not just ayahuasca, it's not just these things, but people talk about being fixed or healed or having healed. And I think that's a bit of a dangerous slope to go down, because I think if you don't have that experience where you feel like you're completely healed, then that's just another thing that layers on top of you as a reason why you're broken. And that's not true. And I think that's it's an important thing that, because that was my experience. Like I didn't feel, I've had these moments. I've had these really prolific, profound moments where I've gone like deep and done like a lot of intense work and, crying on the floor and weeping and like really going into it. And then I wonder why everything isn't perfect for me afterwards, right? It's like, no, but I did it, but I prepared properly. I did all of these things. And then you start to question whether you did it properly or whether it was the right dose or whether it was the right setting. Should I go back for more? And I think that creates this really damaging, potentially, mindset of it's like, okay, it's just going to be the next thing. It's going to be the next thing. It's going to be the next practitioner. And I've been in that in a lot of ways. I probably didn't need to do all of the things that I did. I probably needed to do a couple of things. Now, I'm very grateful that I've had all of the experiences that I have. I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing now if I hadn't gone through that. But I think that we need to be careful about, over emphasizing and over attaching to this fixed idea and this healed idea. That is a very Western medicine thing where it's like, I give you this substance and then the infection goes away and it doesn't come back again. And we just really, really want the infection to not come back again. And I think that it's a dangerous setup. And I'm talking a lot about this because I've had a lot of experience, and I actually haven't had the opportunity to talk about this on a podcast yet. So I'm going to ramble a little bit more on this subject matter.
Please.
Because it's a really dangerous setup, right? In that the assumption is that there is a fix, there is a healed, there is a final end state. And I really don't believe that is the case. We are always continually experiencing, learning, and healing from things in our lives. And so if we think that there's this end state, we are almost, subconsciously setting ourselves up to be completely destroyed at some point in the future, because you go, well, this next thing happens and I feel this way, but I thought I was healed and I thought I could deal with it. So really, I think, a lot of this is about cultivating resiliency. And I think Addison is a prime example of resiliency. And it wasn't something that he planned on. It got forced upon him. I often describe my journey with mental health. It's like having sex with an 800-pound gorilla, in that it's not over until the gorilla says it is, right? And it's true, right? And it's like these things are forced upon you in some ways. And so, when it comes to like a healing journey, right, which I think is something that takes a lifetime, I think the question isn't what is it that I'm going to do that fixes me, or what is the most effective thing, but it's what do I need right now, right? And do I need support? Do I need professional care? Do I need somebody to talk to, right? And I would say just naturally let your body, your being, whatever you want to call it, guide you in the places that, guide you to the places that you need to go, because I have been guided to the places that I needed to be when I needed to be there. But I would say for anybody, and this is not just for therapy, this is not for psychedelics, it's not for medication. I mean, I tried 5 different types of antidepressants and anti-anxiety medication. So like I gave it a really good shot. And again, it was all done with this mindset. If I just take this pill, it's going to be okay. If I just do this thing, it's going to be over, right? And how can we lean in to the fact that this is a journey? That's really what I would want to emphasize. So I actually thank you for asking this question, because I haven't been able to like expound on this for a little bit, but I think it's really important that you don't set yourself up with the false pretense that there is an end state where you have no problems and mental health is no longer a thing for you and you get to say you're healed or recovered. I think it's about managing yourself. It's about managing your being. It's about managing your body, and building a really healthy relationship with the ongoing nature. And I think that's one of the things that we do with Tethr is like, we always say, it's like, this is a team for life. This isn't like you come in, we wave a magic wand and, suddenly you're fixed and you're no longer in need of Tethr, right? There's always going to be things. And so what we really want to do is we want to build a community of accountability, a community of men who show up, a community of men who are willing to be in it for the long haul. And that is exactly the culture that Addison was talking about before, where it is men who show up and who consistently show up, right? In whatever place they are at. You don't have to show up 100%. You can show up 40%, 20%, 10%, but it's just about continually showing up. So I think that's the biggest thing that I would sort of talk about any of these modalities or coming to Tethr or anything. It's just like, how are you showing up? And what are you looking to get out of it, and being very, very clear about what you need, and the process that you're going through as well.
I love that you said all that, and you put it so much more eloquently than I've ever said it. But when I give a talk, I basically say the same thing, but I always say treat your mental health like a full-time job. Like, it's not just the one thing. And I love that you said that, and especially about Western medicine, because so many people who struggle with mental illness or just going through a bad time are looking for that fix, when really, you're not just going to pop a pill and all of a sudden you're going to be all better. And I think that's what everyone expects. Or same with therapy. They go to one session of therapy, they're like, I don't like the therapist, or blah, 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 it doesn't work. And then then they just go on Twitter and kind of complain about mental health and blah, 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 And what I share that same message with you, that it's not one thing that all of a sudden you're going to be fixed. It's all these different avenues that you're going to explore, and it might work one time, it might not work another. And how you said, just listen to your body and listen to what you need in that moment. But you can tell you've went on some psychedelic journeys, the way you put it. It was great.
And I just want to say one thing before you hop to Addison. There are a lot of days that I wake up and say, I fucking hate that I have to deal with this still. Can't it just be done with? Can't I just be fixed? So I am absolutely not immune to this. And, I'm running a mental health community and trying to tell people to take the journey. And I'm like, fuck that. I'm done with this. Could it please just be easier for a little bit? And then I allow myself to feel that. I allow myself to understand that, that like, okay, it's okay. You can feel that way. And then I continue on. Right. And it's like, it's just that constant re-anchoring.
Yeah. Perfect. Addison, what about some of the things that you went on? Especially, Matt mentioned the resiliency and you went through your accident. Like, what are some of the things that you went through and on your journey?
Yeah, no, so much of this echoes it. I always joke that the title of my book is going to be Honor the Journey, because that's all I can ever seem to muster up after everything I've been through. And it's the exact same thing where, I spent 6 of the last 10 years looking to be fixed, like you guys are both talking about. And the issue is that I didn't know that I was looking to be fixed. So it's easier to stand now and know that, but I didn't know that in the moment. And for some odd reason, even if the greatest therapist in the world is sitting there knowing they're not there to fix you, if that's not discussed, if that's not communicated, what I try to empower men to do is to have that conversation, like to set that intention no matter what it is. And so for me, I explored, I had PTSD after finding my dad from his suicide. And then of course, PTSD again in a very different way from the accident, because it was more of a physical experience. and the pain. And then again, there was a grief process because I lost a dear friend in the accident as well. So I sort of ended up with a team of people and so many different options. And again, and when that really switched for me, no matter what I was doing, whether it was more holistic, like, you know, breath work and men's groups, which like Matt, were very formative for me. I would say for me personally, coaching and community were the two game changers. I met my mentor and my coach by accident on a plane on the way to go back to deal with my dad's estate. She happened to be sitting beside me, and I left that plane ride a totally different person. And in that, I sort of get goosebumps every time I say that, because there is a lot of magic to me being here, to my existence. Like, there's a lot of magic threaded in between. And so it's easy when I discuss my story to go, oh, that's the worst thing that could happen to a person, or, you know, who can get through those three things. Someone with a lot of community and a lot of magic woven through every other single breathing moment of those three things, you know. And it's weird, I actually get to show up in the world as someone who's very, very grateful. And I say this a lot, that sometimes I even feel guilty because I feel like I'm one of the most well-supported people I've ever met. And so that's just, you know, part of the balance of it all. But I think that, you know, for me, a big part of it too was getting, who's now going crazy, a dog, making it not about me. I was so, you know, especially right at the point where I was kind of going through suicidal depression, you know, everything was so about me, and my whole family was looking in, and I was going through chronic pain and, you know, trying different things. And it was like this scramble against time. And it really had to switch back into stop trying to fix it, surrender, and honor it. And then everything you're doing. And for me, again, nutrition, hydration, breathing, I mean, just basic living elements became such a big part of my recovery, because when you go back to honoring the journey rather than fixing it, you know, everything becomes a part of it. Like you're saying, it at the full-time job, it comes to full fruition in that way. And, you know, like Matt, I think this is like such a needed reminder right now in this moment for me, because even over the last few weeks, I've started to have like a few little slip ups, or whatever we want to call them, like where I have that moment where I'm like, I was really hoping that I just kind of, that we were on to the next, you know, and it's so many men again and again where it's like, but I was feeling so good for 3 months and now I'm this again. And it's like, that's not a failure. That's just where the real test of honoring the journey is showing up for you. And like Matt said, I always stress this, we are not fixed in showing back up. We are not, you know, martyrs, or we are everyday men who struggle within, you know, what our own experience in different ways every day and make mistakes. And the difference is that we've just gotten 10% crazy enough to champion that and to find community around that. And that's what makes the difference. Yeah, I'm so grateful, because even in the last few weeks, even with such external success, I mean, you know, just I produced this movie this year that was up for an Oscar run. Hank was really proud of my movie. You know, so many things going on. We joined 500 startups. We did the app, like all these things I never would have thought would have happened. And, you know, but then I was still not feeling great. And that's hard to face and to deal with. But it's a lot easier when you choose to stop doing it alone and stop seeing it as something that really needs to be fixed. So that's kind of my bit on that.
Yeah. Both, like the wisdom that's just coming from you both is just tremendous. And I really look forward to getting in here and checking out the app and exploring it a lot more and connecting with people. But before I let you go, I always want to make sure that, you know, I didn't leave anything out in the questioning. Like, did I miss something that people should know about Tether or this app that you really want to kind of make a point of people knowing?
No, I honestly, I think like just sharing what we have. And I think, you know, if what we've said doesn't get you to want to kind of come and download the app, then we have much bigger problems than a question being, no, I'm kidding. I think, it's one of the things that, you know, we always sort of, you know, try and impart, whether it's on the men in our community or, you know, on these shows, right? It's like really this, you know, for us, which is a deeply held value, it's a thing that we sort of orientate our North Star to. I think it's like if there was one thing that we could communicate to men, that I think is really the ethos of everything that we do. It's that struggling doesn't make you any less of a man. It makes you human. And so if there's one thing that we've missed that I would want to impart to anybody that has the opportunity to listen to this podcast, is that there is nothing wrong with you. You are not broken. You are not a problem to be fixed. You are completely enough, and everything that you are going through is natural, normal, and there is a community, there is a place for you, there is a space where you can show up exactly as you are. We have no expectations of you. All we expect of you is that you treat the other men in there with the same respect that you would want to be treated with. Right. And I think that's one of the most universal principles, is treating others as you would expect to be treated. Show up the best way that you can, and just start putting one foot in front of the other. Right. Addison talks about magic, and I love that, because there is magic when you actually start the journey and things start to fall in place for you. People show up, things happen that you could not have otherwise planned. And so what I would say is, like, start putting one foot in front of the other, and start allowing that magic to work for you.
Yeah, that's beautiful. So, I mean, you're on all the app stores. Where do people find this app? How do they connect with you? Social media?
Yep. At Tether for Men on Instagram and Twitter. You can find us Tether on Facebook as well. We are available for download in the Apple App Store and on Google Play, so you can find us wherever. And if you do download it, feel free to give us a 5-star review if you think it's warranted. Drop in a little comment. It really helps us spread the word as far and wide as we possibly can. And yeah, I mean, that's it. Tether for Men. If you search it on Google, if you search it on Facebook, if you search it on Instagram, you will find us. So yeah, come join.
Tethr.
Thank you.
Making sure
Thank you for spelling that out. That's what I should have done. Tethr.
Yeah.
And Addison's like, spell it
out. Gentlemen, thank you so much. This was a super great conversation. I love what you're doing. And like I said, I really look forward to jumping in and getting to be a part of this community. Like I said, on so many episodes, like this is exactly kind of like what my mission has been. So it's been really great to hear from you and connect on this.
Likewise, thank you so much.
Thank you, Ryan. Appreciate it.